Hotep is your brother Beniti Amun Ray. We're back for another post this week slash class, and what we're going to talk about today, something I think is an integral part of dealing with mysticism and spirituality, consciousness, being in a sound mind and a sound body. One thing we have to understand is you can't ascend spiritually and mentally on any level if you're not working in a sound mind and sound body. When an individual might be in that imbalanced mind, they can be open and receptive to different spiritual energies, some that we would term not being positive. So balancement is a key, and we've talked about in many various different aspects, dealing with the 7 principles of Tahuti, the principles of Ma'at, and how those principles are married to each other or merged. There's a connection there. To obtain that balancement, one has to be in a sound mind and a sound body. Now, we've also discussed, for an example, in any great cultural tradition where one is an adept or a student and they are studying under a master, the first thing the master does is deal with that person's issues or anything that might be blocking that person spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. So those would be the stages that would have to be addressed before that student can work spiritually on the path. So we're going to go through some different excerpts from some different information I put together. So let's go through this and we'll discuss it. Seems logical to believe that normal health and soundness of body are vital to any form of development that makes an individual more nearly approach the ideal that the Creator had in mind in creating human beings. It is undoubtedly true that humans were created in the spiritual likeness of the Creator, but it is also true that the Creator had in mind and created the greatest of all miracles in constructing the physical body to surround and clothe the spiritual being within. Wonderfully and fearfully are we made in the physical sense, and the laws of the Creator as expressed by nature have provided for every essential for maintaining soundness in every physical body that is not abused. Now, you tend sometimes to have a lot of people in their studies that bypass the basic elements of understanding the physical realm, and they want to ascend heightened spiritual heights. That's why you've heard me talk about on various posts on the radio show. You have people that want to master levitating and healing and all these spiritual mystical practices, but physically their life is in chaos and disorder. They might be sick all the time. There might be no balancement in their physical life economically. So there's a mess and a disconnect there when you can't bypass the physical and jump automatically to the spiritual realm without attaining that success or balancement on the physical level. This is what creates that disconnect, and this is what kind of throws things out of whack for individuals, and they find why there's not that balancement there. Let's talk about the process of reconstruction real quick. The manner in which blood rushes to a wound, accompanied by other chemical agencies, would coagulate in the wound and close it to prevent the entrance of foreign matter and the unnecessary loss of blood, while other elements start a process of creating new tissue to heal the wound, is but one of the many complicated and marvelous systems used by nature under the direction of the divine mind to preserve the normal condition of the body and keep it at a high standard of usefulness. To believe that the physical body should be weakened in its existing standard or broken down in its relatively important place in the scheme of things is to belittle this wonderful process of reconstruction and to deny the omnipotent wisdom of the Creator. But we find in much of the modern occult and mystical literature of today the inference and often a direct statement that until the seeker for light and illumination breaks down the vitality and physical process of the body, spiritual development and advancement are impossible. That's very important. I want to read that last statement again. It's kind of what we were just talking about. Okay? I want that statement, and I'm going to read it again, to resonate, because this is an important principle to focus on and understand if you're ever going to get to that level. Okay? So let's read it again. But we find in much of the modern occult and mystical literature of today the inference and often the direct statement that until the seeker for light and illumination breaks down the vitality and physical process of the body, spiritual development and advancement are impossible. So until you master, okay, the physical aspect, starting with self and the physical body, spiritual advancement is impossible. Okay? You can't obtain the heights and the levels that you need to obtain because of that imbalancement. And this is reflected in many people when you look around you. And it's not being said in a judgmental aspect of things, but this is why certain things don't work. Okay? And dealing with for an example, religions, briefly. Religions are not practical in the sense, again, they bypass the physical and they take you to a spooky spiritual place not confirmed or existed. So your thought and energy pattern is being taken to a level not confirmed or seen. So when it just says mastering the physical to get to that stage, this is not just in a physical sense. And what I mean by that is you be able to connect the two when there's that balancement there, because one subsists with the other and vice versa. So this is very critical in the beginning stages of this when dealing with a sound mind and sound body. So it's making it crystal clear. You cannot attain spiritual advancement without balancing out or mastering the physical. Okay, let's continue on. This is expressed in one form by those who insist that the seeker and the student should eat only a vegetarian diet and ignore meat in any form, because meat adds too much strength to the physical body, while vegetables will just sufficiently nourish the body to a degree necessary for the maintenance of life. We find the same idea expressed by others who state that long periods of fasting and even of physical suffering for the want of food will give the spiritual part of a human being a greater opportunity to function. Okay, it is true that the more the spiritual side of our nature develops, or in other words, the more developed we become, or mystics in the true meaning of this word, the more sensitive we become to impressions from both the cosmic and the mundane worlds. Such supersensitiveness becomes a vital factor in our daily lives and has a considerable bearing on our poise and peace of mind. Now, when we go up to touch on the diet aspect of it when dealing with the physical, it's using the example of a vegetarian diet or a meat diet, and basically explain one has to understand their genetics and their DNA and what they're in need of. Now, I'm not going to make this dealing with the aspect just of diet. What this is basically saying here, it's diet has a lot to do with spirituality, only in a sense if you don't know your DNA structure, what your body is lacking and what you need, it can affect your spiritual growth. And let's touch on that real quick. There is not one specific diet that works for everybody. I've explained before, diet has a lot to do with your blood type. Let me give you an example. If you are O positive, O negative, those blood types, when you trace them back on the planet, they're the oldest blood types in existence. And you will find the first people that walked the planet started out with those blood types. Now, if we're all connected and we're all the same, why do we have all these other blood types? Where did all these other blood types come from? Because then after that, you have mutations of these blood types that go into A negative, A positive, RH negative, list goes on and on and on. B, AB, again, list goes on and on and on. Each blood type, when you trace their lineage back, you'll see the types of diets that these blood types thrived on varied, from being carnivorous meat eaters to herbivorous vegetarian plant eaters. I'll use O positive based on what I understand and understand, me being O positive. O positive people tend to need higher levels of protein, so you'll find most of our O positive people tend to be meat eaters. Now, I've explained and said your spirits will dictate to you also what you need to intake. Now, it doesn't mean if you are a meat eater you should be eating heavy amounts of meat every single day. It doesn't mean you constantly need to eat high levels of meat. It just means, again, if you do eat meat, balance it out, eat the right meats, the natural meats in the correct state. Then you do have other individuals with blood types that are more herbivorous, that don't need as much high levels of protein. These tend to be more of your plant eaters. So, long story short, not to get into a whole dietary thing, but this is basically saying understanding your physical body in the sense of diet and what the body needs, what minerals it lacks, what proteins it might lack, etc., affects the state of mind. Because if the diet is bad and you're not receiving the correct nutrients, the mind becomes imbalanced. And we all know it's common sense. What we intake, what we eat, affects the way we think. So that's very critical. This is dealing with the physical aspect and how it affects the process of thinking. So that's another situation that has to be evaluated. So you can't be intaking constantly all these sugars, these artificial preservatives, all these chemicals that exist in all these processed foods, because the body works harder to break these processed foods down. When we talked about neuromelanin, and neuromelanin codes every aspect of every organ in your body. It's very important, because the same thing when you're ingesting foods, these processed foods, or these foods that are no good for you, they're assimilated and broken down and distributed into the blood, which in turn can affect your kidneys, your liver, brain function, and all other different types of diseases can set in. So understanding the health aspect is very important when dealing with consciousness or spirituality. Okay? So it says, as stated here, it could have a bearing on your peace of mind. So it's very, very critical in understanding that. Of course, the effect will manifest itself in a greater sensitiveness of the physical mind and the physical body to objective impressions. And we find the truly developed spiritual person crying in the agony at the suffering of humanity and the evils of the world, one moment and the next moment, reveling in the greatest of joy and happiness over the good and beautiful things of life, because they truly developed mystic lives as no one else lives. The mystic's life is full, and every moment of consciousness is charged with the vibrations of the fullness of life. Sad at times and extremely joyous at other times, quiet and receptive at one moment, enthusiastic and active at the next. This truly is living. To say that such spiritual development with the attendant changes in the consciousness of the physical body is disharmony, or that spiritual illumination and development bring disharmony to the physical body, is to wrongly state a fact or falsely misstate a law. Only when the physical body and the objective mind as related organizations are functioning in harmony can a person be truly sensitive to the impressions of the physical world. Alright, so let's connect that real quick. Only when the physical body and the objective mind being related, only when they are functioning in harmony, can you really be functioning in a correct capacity in mastering the physical world. That's why I was saying a couple minutes ago, when dealing with the physical world, there's a spiritual aspect to it, because one links the other. So it's actually a doorway or a bridge in connecting the two. So when you have that disharmony, it's completely impossible to make that spiritual leap in consciousness in your evolution. These, as very simple as this might seem, believe it or not, this is what keeps a lot of people held down. This is why people are not receptive when information or consciousness on a whole different level is presented to them. This is why people can become closed-minded, and unfortunately you will find this applies to a lot of your religious people who are so set in their ways, who have what I call tunnel vision and only see things one way. They don't see it any other way, because the aspect of fear then steps in, because once you start to confront them with a level of consciousness that exists outside of person, place, and thing, or faith and belief, it's hard for them to comprehend that. The mind automatically shuts down, and they are not receptive to the cosmic consciousness of the universe, and then they go into attack mode, where if you are again presenting to them information outside of what they can comprehend, the disease of ignorance kicks in. So they don't understand outside of the concept of God and the devil, heaven and hell. As long as I'm doing what I'm told to do and being good and following all the rules and regulations of religion, I'm going to some fictitious place called heaven. And it also breeds inside the individual the mentality of laziness. It breeds in them the mentality of being unsuccessful, because most people sometimes that are not successful accept their fate, most of the time if they're religious, under the precepts that even though they are not successful here and not doing well here, that they have pie in the sky waiting for them. So this is the disconnect between the sound mind and the sound body, and this explains the reasons why you will not be able to transcend spiritual heights or spiritual development, because of these disconnects. Now, just as much as right now we're talking about, for an example, just a couple of minutes ago, diet. Not only ingesting physically the wrong foods can create that physical imbalancement, also ingesting bad information. Bad information too has an effect on the physical body, in a sense, in the functioning of the brain, because the brain, when dealing with the conscious and the unconscious, bad information tends to focus on the consciousness of what you're aware of at the moment. Because remember, the unconscious mind is constantly working, whether you're aware of it or not. The unconscious mind is where all the information that is stored that needs to be unlocked to awaken you to who and what you are. Now, like I said before, when dealing with knowledge and information, it's only new to you in the sense if you've never heard it before. That's it. It's not new. There's nothing ever you're being told that's new. It appears to be new because you're being reminded for the first time in a long time of this information. Now, this is a tactic and a tool, for an example, I like to say most conscious pimps like to use on people, because they might know levels of information that other people don't, so they use that to suppress a collective group of individuals. And this is how your organizations and your if you want to call them cults, whatever you want to call them, all these groups out there that exist that create that I'm the leader, these are my students and followers, and the leader is always a notch above everybody else. Because of this conscious pimping, I like to call, or mental pimping, because knowledge is power, and knowledge can be power and be abused if one individual recognizes that a group of individuals may not be on their level. This is how this whole following aspect starts, or belonging to these groups where I follow somebody. And then usually what happens in those groups, as I explained before, the leader of that group then becomes, in a sense, deified by its followers, and then that individual, always has that direct connection to the source or the creator, but the students don't, and they have to use that individual as a vessel. Well, that can be nothing but the furthest thing from the truth. All of us have access and connection to the divine. All of us have that latent power that exists within us, the spark of divine consciousness that we have the ability to tap into by way of meditation, by way of disciplining ourselves physically when dealing with diet, by intensifying our spiritual studies, by astral projection. The list goes on and on. We have the latent abilities within us to attain these spiritual heights, just like any other great mystic or leader might claim to. So if you believe that you need something or somebody to do it for you, then you'll always be in that state of servitude where you'll never reach your divine potential. Now, doesn't mean you can't get advice from elders, spiritual guides, and teachers. That's not what I'm saying. Because obviously you need some type of guide or roadmap, but you have to take that guide, whether it be a teacher or if you're studying information in books, and use it as a roadmap, but you have to take the information, apply it to yourself, and come up with a formula that works for you, because it's not the same for everybody. And that's another mistake that's made in all these established dogmas / religions / spiritual organizations, because they create a set system of rules and regulations on how to do things, and sometimes that does not apply evenly to everybody, because everybody's spiritual journey varies. It's not exactly the same way identically, and this is another process that disconnects, the mind from that spiritual consciousness. So you can never ever stay in a system of servitude and ever transcend. And this is the problem you're going to run into when you deal with a lot of these people that belong exclusively, what I like to call, to the Mickey Mouse clubs, whether it's the Black Hebrew Israelites, whether it's the Nuwapians, whether it's members of the Nation of Islam, the 5% Nation. When you stay stuck in one mindset, you cut off your DNA connection to spiritual consciousness. Your DNA is cut off right there at that moment, because once you accept in your mind, for an example, I belong to this organization, and you accept their ideology and their ideology only, you disconnect yourself from everything else in the universe. So you can only grow to a certain level. And this is why it's hard to reach those people, and to reach people who are completely embedded in faith and belief. And religious people sometimes can be the most complicated people to deal with, because the toughest thing to do is talk to somebody who's completely wrong, but yet in their mind they think they're completely right. And we run into this on a daily basis. So a person thinks in his mind, or she thinks in his mind, and they are. What you think in your mind, you are. So if you think you're right, in your mind, you're gonna start to accept and believe that, even if you're completely wrong. But this is where reasoning comes into play. This is where common sense comes into play. When we're dialoguing and debating, for lack of a better word, or discussing information, once we put the facts together, and once we put the information together and compare, regardless of what we think in our minds is correct or true, the truth will speak for itself. This is how consciousness evolves, and a lot of people don't deal with it on that level. They'll go to a state of complete chaos and confusion and in senseless debates. And that's why I said, at this point, for those that are traveling the spiritual path, and the day and time we live in, and the day and time of where our planet is evolving on a consciousness level, we don't have time to get into nonsensical debates over idiotic stuff that's a waste of energy, because these are your spiritual vampires that suck the life out of you. Because if you're sitting there arguing, fussing, and debating with somebody that's completely embedded in faith and belief, like I've said before, you can sit there and pound them over the head for hours with facts and information, but their mind is already programmed where they're not going to budge. They're still going to have that same mindset, regardless of what you're telling them, and regardless of how much truth you're coming at them with. They'll never ever accept the reality of it until they raise themselves up to it, which then opens the doorway for them to want to change for self. You can't make nobody change, and that's why I've told you, even if you think in the past you might have shared some information with somebody, and you're responsible for sparking that individual, but that individual still had to do the work to make the change. You were just used as a tool or the vessel to assist in that change. So we have to understand how that process works, and dealing with that. Alright. So let's go down here. Let's skip down a little bit through some of these notes. Balanced living. Let's talk about that real quick. We're going to finish with two of these principles. Okay. When we carry our search for truth to such an extreme that we sacrifice the essentials of normal living and become fanatics and study and practice, then we weaken the normal standard of our physical body. And when we carry our desire for physical perfection to such an extreme that we sacrifice the development of our intellect and our spiritual unfoldment, then we awaken our spiritual relationship with the cosmic and become more of a beast than one who has cultivated his or her spiritual nature but neglected the physical body. This is powerful. Let's discuss this real quick, okay? This is basically saying one can go to the extreme, too much in the physical or the spiritual, creating that chaos and confusion in that individual's life. Now here's a powerful statement from the spiritual aspect, and we all know people like this, and this is going to resonate, I'm sure. If you're watching this video, an individual, he or she will come to mind that fits this description. Amongst us too, we have our spooky space cadets / spiritual fanatics, where they take it too much to the extreme, where they completely neglect the physical, and they're so engrossed and embedded in the spiritual, there's a disconnect that's created mentally that can't even be comprehended or explained. These are your people that, you know, have all these extraterrestrial experiences. They got all these stories they want to tell you. They're not grounded in reality. All they do is deal with mysticism and spirituality, and physically their life is a mess, and financially their life is a mess, because they hide and engross themselves in the spiritual world to kind of not accept the reality or the responsibility of what goes on in the physical world. Okay? These will be your nutcases, whatever terminology you want to give to them. And this is a reflection of an imbalancement. So I'm sure we all know people like that. They carry a certain vibrant energy that might be disturbing to your spirit because you sense the disconnect and the imbalancement there, so you don't gravitate towards it because you term that person a little bit too much out there or off the wall. All right. Then dealing with the physical, I find this interesting because it used the term vibrating on the level of a B state. Okay, this is deep, because then you have the individual that focuses too much on the physical. Okay, this is the other individual. Now, this could be your individual that's constantly chasing physical things, constantly chasing the physical things to complete the spiritual voids that they're not addressing. The individual that needs the nicest cars all the time, or anything materialistic. They vibrate so heavily on the physical that their frequency vibration is so low that the ancestors or the spirits don't even recognize the light that they're emitting through their aura, so they vibrate on a B state. Okay, these are your physical people who are completely physical, and all they do is chase life's physical pleasures. They vibrate on a beast level. That's powerful. So these are the other individuals that go to the complete opposite extreme of your spiritual fanatics. And these people are so engrossed in the physical world, the reason why they're never satisfied is because they're not feeding the spiritual or the intellect. So the reason why they constantly want more physical things to satisfy them is because of that spiritual imbalancement. Now again, this is important to understand, okay, in dealing with a sound mind and a sound body. That's why I chose this topic, because this is not about just picking up some books, okay? And though you hear us joke around a lot about it, especially if you tune into the radio show, sometimes we like to use that sense of humor to teach and educate, to lighten up the mood. But this is critical in understanding, because you can pick up 1,000,000 books and you could study all this ancient information. You could take books on ancient cultures. You could study all you want about ancient Egypt. I know people that read books on everything above and beyond the sun, every topic you can think of: magic, healing, ancestral worship, etc. But if you're not in sound mind and sound body, none of that stuff will work if you don't have the tools to apply the information that you're reading and studying. This is why some people study for years and you may not see no difference or change in them, other than the fact that they know a lot of information that they've studied and remembered. But we might know that one individual who they might be a good person. You might say, well, they're a decent person, but you might not see a reflection of any change on a very detailed level in them because of this factor here that we're talking about. That deals with a whole nother level. So this is very critical in understanding how this process works in dealing with a sound mind and sound body, and how it cannot be ignored. I don't care what anybody tells you. You can't just pick up books, or you can't just claim and make a statement or accept an ideology without first addressing, what state of mind are you in, okay, when dealing with a sound mind, and how is your body functioning related to that sound mind. So this is the connection between all aspects of it, okay, very important. Alright, let's finish with this last section here in dealing with balanced living. And again, I think this is very important, and I would suggest people really meditate and focus on some of the principles we discussed here if you want to go to that next level. Okay? Again, you can't jump spiritually to that level if you don't address these issues that we're talking about. Alright, moderation in all things is the fundamental law of the universe. So as we just talked about, you can't be so engrossed in the spiritual completely or the physical. When dealing with moderation or balancement, you need to seek that path right in between. Okay, and I've said this before. There is a time to meditate, to go into deep contemplative thought, to say affirmation or some form, if you want to call it prayer, which I don't like to use that word because I believe that deals with spooky stuff. Whether you want to call it invocations or affirmations or petitioning your ancestors. There's a time for those spiritual practices. There's also, though, a time to work. There's a time to have fun. There's a time for physical pleasures. This would be seeking that path of balancement, because if you sat around and meditated all day, nothing would get done. Vice versa, if you were doing things physically all day and just chasing physical desires, the spiritual would be lacking. Now, what also can happen is when there's a very severe imbalancement, then it can also disrupt the physical function in the body. You definitely can get sick. You can definitely have a disconnect when there's not that balance between the spiritual and the physical world. The body becomes what we call dim, and not enough illumination is regenerating the cells. Therefore, a person can be susceptible, and their immune system can break down, and it could be so very minute to getting a cold / flu, or it can get so deep and intense if that individual is so physical, organs of the body can break down, and a person can obtain very serious diseases and become ill or sick. Or to the person that has no spirituality and is completely engrossed in the physical, and they're overwhelmed by everyday life's problems, this creates a certain level of stress, which can break down the central nervous system and cause one to have a nervous breakdown. And we know stress can cause all other types of levels of complications in the body. So this is moderation and balancement is a key in understanding, this aspect and piecing it all together. And again, this cannot be neglected. So again, you can read all you want on any topic and information, but if you're not doing this aspect of it, you will not be able to assimilate and break down that information and apply it. Okay? If a student finds that eating meat enriches the body too greatly, this is going to clarify what we were talking about earlier, and that a vegetarian diet is more consistent with the chemical processes of the body, then the student is indeed wrong if he or she ignores the fact and refuses to become a vegetarian, and vice versa. if an individual realizes they might need higher levels of protein, have to seek a balanced diet when dealing with diet. So it's using that metaphor again, back quick in relation to the diet issue. Your DNA, you have to determine what you need, and when the spirit is speaking to you, it's saying if you neglect that spirit, for an example, which is just your higher level of consciousness speaking to you, when you neglect and go against that, it's going to create problems for you. Okay, you can't ignore what your higher conscious or the master within is trying to speak to you, is what this is saying. Alright, so let's finish with this last statement and we're going to stop here. But because one finds these things true in one's own case is not sufficient warrant for the sudden determination to become a reformer and preach and advocate that everyone else should do these things. Alright, so let's establish this real quick. Like I was talking about a few minutes earlier, this is why joining a lot of these organizations and these groups doesn't work, because, as it said here, just because one might find in their case that a certain system or way of doing things works for them, this may not be the fact or the case for everybody else. Because once you start saying this is the only way to do it and this way only, this is how you create a system of control, and this is what tends to happen. And this is why these dogmas and these organizations and religions don't work, because they falsely advocate that there's only one correct way of doing things, and that's not true. That's not true. People vary in degrees on many different levels on how things can be done, because at the end of the day, we're all traveling to get to the same point, to evolve into immortality, but we're not all quite taking the same path, but we will meet up, because each individual's DNA structure and their connection to their ancestors will vary and dictate what path that they're going to take. So just because it works for you doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody else. And where you go wrong is where you try to force your ideologies and your ways on somebody as being the only right way. That's the most incorrect thing you can do, and this is why established religion and things of that nature don't work. Okay? Science has not yet found any one diet, and we just talked about this earlier, that is adoptable to and beneficial for every human being. We just talked about that. Okay? There is not one correct diet. Okay? I've had, for an example, over the years, and I might have mentioned this in the past, I can't remember if I did or I did not. There's a lot of people that, for an example, do the Dr. Sebi diet, and it's not to knock it, but the Dr. Sebi diet is more for individuals whose genetics are raised in a tropical environment. It's a diet that deals high in natural nuts and grains and fruits. That doesn't work for an individual, for an example, an O-positive band, that might need higher levels of protein, and you'll find certain individuals that might need higher levels of protein that are severely lacking in it and go on some of these strict vegan diets. You'll see it affects them so bad, their livers, their kidneys, they start to get that jaundice look to their skin. Some of them I've watched turn completely yellow, and their skin color gets discolored because they're not ingesting enough of protein levels. And I've even known people that have taken on this diet, these diets have gotten severely ill or sick because they didn't do a thorough research and get a thorough checkup to determine what vitamin levels and minerals in the body are at the correct levels and which aren't, because once you get that determination, then you know what types of foods you need to gravitate to and ingest, and what ones you don't. That's why there's not one, as it says here, and we just read in these notes, there's not one diet that is adoptable and beneficial to every human being on the planet. That's not the case. It's not true. It can scientifically be proven and factually proven. So just because you make that dietary choice, if you didn't research it thoroughly enough, that may not be the right dietary choice for you. That can hinder one's spiritual growth. Very important to understand. So that's a very important statement to ingest and understand. Okay, so then let's finish with this last section here. Nor has the human mind ever been able to conceive of one form of thinking or one line of mental action that is comprehensible and applicable to all. We must pursue our individual paths, here's the key, and our individual modes to meet our individual requirements in eating, resting, thinking, and doing. This calls for tolerance on the part of those who analyze their own requirements. Okay? So we're going to finish that. So this, all that is a connection and a balancement that one has to obtain and seek. Now, rest and sleep. This is important too. And we have to understand several things. You have to adopt a rest and a sleep pattern system, because this aids also in spiritual growth. Now, I want to add this. Melanin is recharged and replenished and energized in the night hours when the sun goes down. You have to understand it. Some people have their higher levels of spiritual impressions late overnight into the early morning hours, where they do their most intense thinking and spiritual growth, which that's somebody such as myself. And where the daytime not as powerful, because physically the melanin is recharging, especially if you're outdoors. And that's why I said you need to, depending on your level of melanin or a melanated being, somebody that's a fair-skinned melanated person only needs a minimum of 20 to 25 minutes of physical sun to recharge their neuromelanin, whereas a dark-skinned person needs more time in the sun because they absorb higher levels of melanin due to the physical manifestation of the neuromelanin on the skin. They're able to absorb it, and it's broken down and assimilated a lot quicker and through the system than a less melanated being who needs low levels of it, where it's not broken down or absorbed as quick. So all this process has to be understood, understood, and overstood to really get you to the point how to put it all together. So sleep is another key. All these things: sleep, diet, study, meditation. When you're doing all these practices consistently and balanced out, I can basically tell you, you will see such a huge change in your spiritual consciousness. You will feel it mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and most of all, physically. The things that you need on a financial level will be provided. The doors will open for you, and you'll find the things that you need you will get and receive, and things start to change drastically. Okay? So in closing, the reason why I chose this topic: sound mind, sound body. We must establish in our minds you cannot reach your spiritual, mental, you cannot attain any higher level of consciousness and reach your divine potential if you are not in a sound mind and a sound body. It's that simple. Alright, quick announcement before we go. Just wanted to announce, I announced it on the radio show this past Thursday night. As those that do know, Dr. Delbert Blair is recovering from a variety of different physical complications with his eyesight, his feet, and some other things that he just went through some processes on. And what some of us who know him well and people that have studied under the elder are asking people to assist and support him in his recovery. And remember, Dr. Blair and others like him, they've been doing this for a long period of time. This is what they do for a living. So when something like this happens, they pay for it out of pocket, and basically all his medical expenses are being paid out of pocket. So we're asking people who can help out and assist with that. Please help and assist with it. It doesn't matter if it's the smallest amount to whatever you can help and assist. You can actually go to his website, themedicenter2.com, and you will see his physical address on there where you can mail what he prefers if anybody can assist, postal money orders addressed in his name. You can find the contact information on there, phone number information. If you got any questions, you could actually call the office with the number on there, and you'll probably get either Cynthia or Tony if you have any questions about it or you want to see how he's doing. Again, remember the elder's up there in age. Let's make sure what happens to him, or we don't let the same thing happen to him where, in my opinion, happened to Dr. Ben, where he was put in the care in a nursing home to individuals who shouldn't have been taking care of him, that didn't have his best interest in mind. But that's a whole other story. So when these elders who have been doing this for 50, 60 years, we have to understand eventually they're going to get old, and they're going to need our help and our aid. And you know, Dr. Blair is at that age now. So let's make sure we are the ones who dictate and facilitate what happens to our elders, not put them in the hands of these demons who don't care about them. But Dr. Blair is recovering. He is resting. I speak to him throughout the week. He's right now is just resting and relaxing, going to recharge himself for a couple weeks and then get back to doing what he's doing. So if you can help out and support with that, I put that information out there. Also, tune into, for those who might be watching this or not familiar, tune into our radio show every Thursday night, 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on TalkShoe.com, called Awakening Universal Minds. You can find the link right here on this YouTube page. You can also find a link on the Mother Nubia Inc. Google Plus page, where all the shows are archived. And again, you can find a link on that page also to the show. We've had many great people, or many great of our teachers and elders on the show. We've had Dr. Phil Valentine on the show, Dr. Delbert Blair. We've had Dr. David Emotep on the show. We've had Brother Panic. We've had Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum, Dr. Jewel Pookrum. We've had Scott Allen Roberts, Ralph Ellis, you name it. We've had some great scholars and elders on the show breaking down the information. It's a great show, and it goes worldwide over the internet, and it's having a great impact on people from the feedback we're getting. So we start at 9. It always says 9 to 11, but we go longer. So if you may be one of those people that are working and can't tune in late, we're usually on the air for 3 to 4 hours. So if we start at 9, we're usually on the air till about 1 o'clock in the morning, talking about everything and everything above and beyond the sun. And even after guests leave, we stay on the show and we have a detailed discussion. Myself, Brother Ravana Noon, and the other good brother, Sar Gidi. We get into a lot of topics, so definitely something, if you haven't checked out, definitely check it out. So again, join us this Thursday, 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on Awakening Universal Minds. Alright, that's all I got for you now. Appreciate everybody tuning in, and we will see you on the next post. Hotep.